Have you ever gotten your head cut off? Neither have I. But in this next segment of my series on women in the French Revolution, I'm going to talk about someone who did. I'm going to talk about Olympe de Gouges. Now, in the previous segment, which I'd encourage you to watch if you haven't already, I spoke of Marie Antoinette, and I spoke of traditional interpretations of women and views of women and all of that kind of stuff. And really with Marie Antoinette, a woman as a tragic victim. And in these next couple of segments, I'm going to be talking about woman as advocate. And what we see here is in the French Revolution in 1789, you had the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Now note that the very title of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen is inherently sexist and really by intention leaves half of the population out. And while we see that we have this declaration, which is kind of piggybacking on the experience of the American Revolution as well, all men are created equal. Well, this should apply to women as well. And Olympe de Gouges is one of the first feminists in the sense of someone who is the earliest, as far as we see with French women, to come out and really make a declaration that women deserve equal rights to men. Now, this Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, she writes several things and is really kind of patterning her words after the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the, well, male citizen. Even though it doesn't say male, it really implies male. So I'm going to take a look at this document, we're going to analyze it, I'm going to read from it, and I'm going to give you some commentary and put it kind of in the context of the time, and that's really going to be the bulk of what we're going to do in this segment. Mothers, daughters, sisters, and representatives of the nation demand to be constituted into a national assembly, believing that ignorance, omission, or scorn for the rights of woman are the only causes of public misfortunes and of the corruption of governments. The women have resolved to set forth a solemn declaration of the natural, inalienable, and sacred rights of woman in order that this declaration, constantly exposed before all members of the society, will ceaselessly remind them of their rights and duties. Now, what de Gouges is doing here is she is patterning the language that men are demanding rights before the world. Well, it is time for women to do the same. Hey, men, you forgot something. Consequently, the sex that is as superior in beauty as it is in courage in the sufferings of maternity recognizes and declares in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being the following rights of woman and of female citizens. How soon men forget the pains of childbirth. I remember when my wife was giving birth to our daughter, I had to leave the room for a minute, all right? It was a really tough experience for me. Now, of course, then I think about my wife who didn't have the luxury of leaving the room, who didn't have the luxury of having a break or taking a breather, and was in a lot more physical pain than me. In fact, the ancient Spartans would give a woman a tombstone if she died in childbirth. This is seen kind of like a battle in some cultures. So she's reminding everybody, first and foremost, women go through a great deal of pain for the continuity of society, and they deserve something back for it. Now, the other thing we can see here is that she is bringing up the Supreme Being. We see that Olympe de Gouges is speaking the language of the Enlightenment, not the language of Christianity or anything like that, but the language of deism, invoking the name of this almighty deistic Supreme Being. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these articles. First of all, Article 1, patterned after Article 1 of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Woman is born free and lives equal to man in her rights. Social distinctions can be based only on the common utility. Now, the common utility, we have these social distinctions not only between nobles and churchmen and everyone else, but also the distinction between men and women. We need to evaluate what rational purpose does this distinction serve, and is there a reason for it? We're looking at this through the lens of the Enlightenment, which so far really has failed to consider the rights of women. Article 3, the principle of sovereignty rests essentially with the nation, which is nothing but the union of woman and man. No body and no individual can exercise any authority which does not come expressly from it. Now, the nation. Women are part of the nation too. And we look at this nationalism of the French Revolution, we look at this tearing down of the barriers between the first, second, and third estates. What about the barriers between the genders, the barriers between man and woman? Article 4, liberty and justice consist of restoring all that belongs to others. Thus, the only limits on the exercise of the natural rights of woman are perpetual male tyranny. These limits are to be reformed by the laws of nature and reason. Once again, we see some parallel language to the Declaration of Independence in the U.S., the laws of nature and of nature's God. When we look at this through the lens of reason, we don't see any justification other than really old wives' tales about women. I guess that was sexist to call it an old wives' tale. Strike that, all right? But we're looking at this, and this discrimination against women has no true rational basis, and thus, according to the principles of the Enlightenment, it is invalid. The law must be the expression of the general will. All female and male citizens must contribute either personally or through their representatives to its formation. It must be the same for all. All people should have a hand in writing the laws, not just the men. Now, Article 10 is especially powerful to me, where she says, no one is to be disquieted for his very basic opinions. Woman has the right to mount the scaffold. She must equally have the right to mount the rostrum. Now, a woman can be punished for crimes under the law, just like a man can when it comes time to punish a woman. But she is not allowed to mount the rostrum to speak in public. Although she can be humiliated in public and punished at the scaffold, she cannot speak in public and have a hand in formulating the laws which affect her. Before I go on, let me give a quick shout out to Miss Palmer's class at St. Joe's. They have been really great to me. All these guys, Swaggy, Adam Green, even though you pull for the Gamecocks, and John, who put together this great epic photoshopped picture of all the group. If I didn't name you specifically, still thinking about you, got you here, St. Joe's, much love to you. Now, moving on again with the rest of this Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. Article 11, the free communication of thoughts and opinions is one of the most precious rights of woman, since that liberty assures recognition of children by their fathers. Any female citizen thus may say freely, I am the mother of a child which belongs to you, without being forced by a barbarous prejudice to hide the truth. Now, today we think of this as a given, and I think this is very important to consider in the context of women's rights, because today, if a woman says, that's this child's dad, then the guy has to submit to a paternity test. And if he passes or fails, I guess whatever he's going for in this paternity test, then he is obligated by law to pay child support. Yet at this time, a woman could be prosecuted for slander or something like that if she were to say that this man is the father of this child. And a child who is born out of wedlock really had no legal protection. And meanwhile, a woman who bore a child out of wedlock, she had to rely on the generosity of this man. It was really up to him whether he was going to support his illegitimate children or not. So we see here that Olympe de Gouges is outlining an injustice that has thankfully been eradicated in the modern Western world. Article 12, the guarantee of the rights of woman and the female citizen implies a major benefit. This guarantee must be instituted for the advantage of all and not for the particular benefit of those to whom it is entrusted. So again, you had this situation in France before the French Revolution where the clergy and the nobility, these privileged classes, got to have an inordinate say on what the laws were. And the French Revolution is about everyone being able to contribute to making the laws, and Olympe de Gouges says that women need to do so as well. Article 13. For the support of the public force and the expenses of administration, the contributions of woman and man are equal. She shares all the duties and all the painful tasks. Therefore, we must have the same share in the distribution of positions, employment, offices, honors, and jobs. Now, this sounds a lot like Abbé Sieyès when he wrote What is the Third Estate, where he says, look, the Third Estate does pretty much all the productive work in France, and therefore women should have just as much authority, Olympe de Gouges is saying, because women do tasks as well. And by the logic that Abbé Sieyès is putting out there, that the third estate does pretty much everything of any worth, well, women do all kinds of stuff of worth too. So therefore, they should be able to vote, to run for office, to have political opinions and express them in public. Article 16. No society has a constitution without the guarantee of rights and the separation of powers. The Constitution is null if the majority of individuals comprising the nation have not cooperated in drafting it. Now, keep in mind, due to a slightly longer lifespan for women, women comprise the majority of pretty much every society. And when we look at just men formulating laws and constitutions, well, we have left out not half, but really technically a majority of the inhabitants of the nation. So therefore, that Constitution is void if it does not include women. Article 17, property belongs to both sexes, whether united or separate. For each, it is an inviolable and sacred right, which this is something that goes all the way back to Locke and just basic ideas of property rights in a liberal context. And she's saying here that, look, a woman, in some cases, let's say that a woman was an only child of a man and she didn't get married. Well, she could control that property technically, but as soon as she gets married, or if there was a male inhabitant to kind of be her guardian, it was only in certain cases that a woman could own or control her own property. And Olympe de Gouges is pointing out the injustice of this and demanding equal property rights for women. Now, once she's finished with her article, she's got a little addendum here, which is really valuable, in my opinion, in looking at what she's doing here, and really kind of summing this up. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Woman, wake up! The alarm bell of reason is being heard throughout the whole universe. Discover your rights. The powerful empire of nature is no longer surrounded by prejudice, fanaticism, superstition, and lies. The flame of truth has dispersed all the clouds of folly and usurpation. Enslaved man has multiplied his strength and needs recourse to yours to break his chains. Notice the language of Rousseau here. Having become free, he has become unjust to his companion. Oh, women, women, when will you cease to be blind? What advantage have you received from the revolution? We see that the third estate, if you're a man, is doing great, but what advantage have you received? And then she goes on to talk about marriage. Now, keep in mind that marriage as we see it today, now some people see it as a religious ceremony, kind of like the divine right of kings. You know, God ordains marriage, that sort of thing. In a lot of marriage ceremonies, women still say to honor and obey. My wife said it. I don't know if she had any intention of following through with that, but it's just kind of a running joke, I guess, in a lot of circles. But people look at marriage differently. Now, of course, today a lot of people look at marriage in the form of a social contract, that these are two people who are uniting together in their own will, and they are creating this social contract or marriage bargain, or whatever you want to call it. And she says here that marriage, as it's understood in France in her day, marriage is the tomb of trust and love. The married woman can with impunity give bastards to her husband, and also give them the wealth which does not belong to them. The woman who is unmarried has only one feeble right. Ancient and inhuman laws refuse to her for her children the right to the name and wealth of their father. Now keep in mind, if a child is born to a woman illegitimately within marriage, then that was understood to be her husband's child, and he would raise this child that was not even his so that he wouldn't be publicly embarrassed. And yet, if there is a child that is actually his, that is not born by his wife, then he has no obligation to legally recognize that child or support that child. And Olympe de Gouges is pointing out the inherent injustice and hypocrisy in this arrangement. And then she goes on to propose a social contract between man and woman, not divine right of kings, not top down, but bottom up, where a man and a woman are entering into a marriage as equals. We, so and so and so and so, move by our own will, unite ourselves for the duration of our lives and for the duration of our mutual inclinations. I mean, for life, unless we decide otherwise. After all, this is a contract. We can both get out of it if we both consent to it. Under the following conditions, we intend and wish to make our wealth communal, meanwhile reserving to ourselves the right to divide it in favor of our children and of those toward whom we might have a particular inclination. Note we, not my husband, controlling all the property. That is approximately the formula for the marriage act I propose for execution. Upon reading this strange document, I see rising up against me the hypocrites, the prudes, the clergy, and the whole infernal sequence. Now keep in mind the clergy being part of an infernal sequence. This is kind of hostile to Christianity. This is very anti-clerical in the spirit of the French Enlightenment. But how my proposal offers to the wise the moral reasons for achieving the perfection of a happy government. So we're looking at marriage the same way that we're looking at government as a social contract. Moreover, I would like a law which would assist widows and young girls deceived by the false promises of a man to whom they were attached. I would like, I say, this law to force an inconstant man to hold to his obligations, or at least to pay an indemnity equal to his wealth. Again, I would like this law to be rigorous against women. So I don't want to be sexist here. This could apply to women as well as men. But here is Olympe de Gouges, more than 200 years ago, advocating for legally enforced child support. So this document here, while it was very radical at the time, it was very, very forward thinking. Now, not for writing this, but for other reasons. Just about anybody could be at the wrong place at the wrong time during the Reign of Terror, but Olympe de Gouges was beheaded during the Reign of Terror. So she was killed, and, that happened to a lot of people. Actually, most of the women I'm going to talk about, all of the French women in this series were beheaded. And today, there is a place, Olympe de Gouges, and that is a square in Paris. So while she got guillotined, she's got a place named after her, and we're talking about her today. So she lived a lot longer, technically, than the people who executed her, because we still talk about her today, and she has had an influence on society. And speaking of people who have had an influence on society, I am not done yet. Please continue with me. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the British debate featuring Mary Wollstonecraft. So I hope that you'll take a look at that as well. To be continued.